Good morning. My name is Cindy Sapa. I'm a publisher for the Idaho Business Review, and I'd like to welcome you to the second breakfast series in the 2026 program series, Policy Meets Profit, Business View on Legislation. We're so glad you're starting your day with us. Idaho Business Review editor Mark Lutz is lining up an excellent panel for today's discussion, which you'll be introduced to momentarily. But first, the breakfast series would not be possible without the support of our 2026 program sponsors. Holly Tropsel is our presenting sponsor. Holly Tropsel is Idaho and the Holly Troxel is Idaho and the Inland Northwest premier business and litigation firm. Thank you, Holly Troxel. I'd also like to thank our supporting sponsors, Bank of America, St. Luke's Health Plan, and the Grove Hotel. Let's thank them for their support. Without further ado, I'd like to bring to the podium Mark Lutz, editor for the Idaho Business Review. He will introduce you to today's panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to what's going to be a lively discussion today. We set these topics up last year before all of the series for this year. And this one is a staple. It's always very popular. It's always a great conversation. And we have some returning panelists at other panels, and this one in particular. We were talking just the other day about when we started taking video of these breakfast series events, and I thought back to it, and I thought, well, our first one was just in January. It was on AI, and I realized this was January last year.
2025 was gone, and 2026 shaping up to be no different. So I'm sure this legislative session just flew by. It seemed to missed it, but
so it's always a great one. I always look forward to this. And our panelists today, I'll just say their names and their titles. You can learn a bit about them in the programs. We have Corey Sherwood, the Regional Vice President of Advocacy and Government Relations for St. Alphonsus Trinity Health. We have Brennan Summers, Chief Governmental Affairs Officer, Idaho Department of Education. Wendy Sechrist, the Executive Director, Idaho Workforce Development Council. I'll tell you a secret about Minnie. I've been trying to get her on a panel ever since
They don't tell us before, but no.
Great for kiss. Molly McCarty, Chief External Affairs Officer, Idaho Transportation Department, and Lisa Ray Anderson, the Director of Advocacy for AARP Idaho. And if any of you attended our first breakfast series of this year, you'll no doubt recognize our moderator. He's a repeat offender this year. Tom J. Mortel for Kunan G. Prayer at College.
Thank you, Mark and City. It's our pleasure to be the presenting sponsor of this series, and I appreciate the opportunity to moderate today's panel. I spent, on behalf of the Boise Metro Chamber, Hospital Association, a fair amount of time during the legislative session advising, evaluating legislature. Don't do anything to advocate, steer Bay Claire to State House, but and watch streams closely. So it's my pleasure to have the opportunity to interact with these guests, these panelists and guest speakers today. So I'd like to start out with a question for all of you. Let's start immediately to my right and just work with Corey and then work our way down the table. What current legislation has positively or negatively impacted or could impact your organization coming out of the 2026 session?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to Idaho Business Review for the invitation to come back and do this again. So on the positive side of things, I really think some of the workforce investments are we consider a win, and Wendy will talk more about ICO launch, but the continuation of that program is really important for healthcare as one of the having a lot of the in-demand careers that are supported by that program. And then significant investments in growing our medical education pipeline. It did make it through the legislature, approving expansion in those seats. And then there was a law that was passed 2 years ago, the parental consent law, that really was aimed fairly narrowly, but then it had very broad implications as far as minors being able to receive care without a parent-specific consent. The broader implications of that were that schools were uncertain if they could even provide a Tylenol or a Band-Aid to a student. I think there was an actual incident where a student athlete broke their leg playing football, but they were away. It was an away day, the parents weren't there, they couldn't reach the parents, and this law made it uncertain if they could actually provide the care. Some fixes were made to that law this year after trying last year unsuccessfully. It also helps with suicide prevention services, young people being able to call the suicide hotline. The law had provided for an emergency care, so an initial phone call they could take from a minor, but the standard of care would be to do a follow-up call to make sure that the young person had followed through the safety plan and that sort of thing. But follow-up call wasn't considered an emergency, so they didn't do it. So those fixes are very positive. There was a heartbreaking situation that happened in Nampa with a baby that was born to parents who had lost 5 previous children. And the foster parents who had taken the previous children in, the nurses, the social workers, everybody was trying to get the state to get eyes on this baby as it went home with parents because they had grave concerns for the infant. Sadly, the rules constrained CPS from really intervening where there wasn't a complaint for that current child, and 12 days later that everyone was dead. And so the combination of our nurses, social workers, foster parents banded together to get a law passed that they called Benji's Law, named after the infant, that requires child protection services to get eyes on that child within a 12-hour period after a complaint is made, and there are certain criteria met that mean that infant could be at risk. And then something that we tried to get past 10, 12 years ago, requiring that oral chemotherapy meds be covered the same way as IV chemo. A lot of the advances in chemotherapy are oral meds, but they're covered a different way by your insurance. That often meant that oral meds required somebody to pay $10,000 of a pharmacy to get their chemo. So getting oral chemotherapy parity actually happened this year, and so we're thankful for that. On the negative side, I would say some of the Medicaid policy changes that I can go more into, but all combined, a lot of Medicaid policy changes mean more people losing Medicaid coverage and a source of coverage for the care that they receive.
Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm keenly aware that I'm a thorn amongst the roses out here. The dog kid, the Kentucky Derbies, will just happy to be here, race. I'm so excited to be here.
You are whispering.
I can't believe this because the superintendent is gone. She's up north today at meetings today, so I could pull out the kind of louder suits, which when she's up there, it's a stop saying right on your dress too. It is actually Superintendent Cushwell's birthday today, so if you get a chance, or give her some on social media or text her, she wanted to be here. Like I said, she's up north at meetings, not doing it on her birthday. It's like I said, privileged to work with her in the. It's not a spectator's forum when it comes to education policy in our legislature. You don't get to sit back and watch. We have a lot of legislators who in the off season find a solution, and then they'll spend the session looking for the problem. And so, unfortunately, those solutions are often handed down to administrators, school boards, and the worst are teachers. And when that happens, that's problematic. So we spend almost as much time playing whack-a-mole on bills that are harmful as being able to promote bills that are going to be helpful to education, I hope. With no money this year, as blatant as that is, we thought this would be kind of a simple session where with no money we could just kind of slide through. That did not end up being the case. A little insider baseball. I've lived in the House Education and Senate Education committees this year. I was at every single committee. And you had two diametrically opposed chairmen there, and Chairman Ocklitz and Chairman Lent. They look at the world very differently. In House Education, you have almost like an ideological tie in that the more moderate conservatives and the two Democrats on that committee voted nearly opposite as the rest of the members of the committee. So what you had in House Ed was a one voting group, one member for having the sniffles and not being there from certain bills going through or certain bills not going through. And so we look and we hear about a lot of talk about some bills, but it's the ones you did not hear about that were not talked about that we're mindful of. So you're one vote away from a bill that would require schools to aggregate immigration status of students and then report that back. That was going to be a burden on schools. You did not see that on the House floor or the Senate floor because, and a tie in the committee tie. You're one vote away from mandatory Bible read coming to the floor and you voted on. And so we know there are educators rolling their eyes in the frustration around the 60-second moment of silence that did make it forward, was signed back up there. It's part of politics. This idea that some of this stuff went through so that some of the other stuff didn't have to, and we, Dick Frischel's not a legislator that gets to vote on these bills, but we worked shoulder to shoulder on some of them. Our big priority this year was Senate Bill 1288, which is a high needs bill for special education. So special education funding, I've been digging into, you probably are more aware than I was, but any student that shows up to the school, you have to educate them and you have to provide the resources they need. You have students, NIO costs the state, costs the school district over $100,000 a year because of what they need. There's just simply no way around it. You have students that need full-time medical care while they're in school, capitalization. How you feel about that or how our legislators feel about that doesn't matter. The federal government has already ruled that you have to cover it. So we have legislators who openly in committee say that these students should be institutionalized and should not be in our schools. We're starting to feel that way. We don't care. We still have to fend for them. So what Superintendent Chris wrote is she got real creative with money. She found the interest off of two accounts, 8 drivers at fund and career-ready students, and put together a $5 million fund. We were able to go to the legislators. Say we have $5 million at this one time, not new money. This should be the easiest bill in the world. And what that does is tax relief, because the school districts don't have to pick up that check now. These are for students that cost between $30,000 and $100,000 a year. And this could be the last dollar after they do private insurance, after Medicaid, but everything else is covered. You would be shocked at how hard that was to get through. We had to fight. We got it done, and we're really happy the governor signed it. And so that was our big one that we're thrilled about. Is there is something we can deliver to education. We can tell our teachers, our principals, and our superintendents that there is now a mechanism that can help recoup some of those costs. But it was an interesting session for education. And we deeply appreciate those, especially those in this room, who don't let education operate at a vacuum, who are able to make the connection between education and industry, between education and media, journalism, everything going on and bring it all together. So we thrilled the session is over.
Many share that emotion.
Yeah,
Rick.
yeah, I'll say ditto. Glad the session is over. So for the Workforce Development Council, we had a couple of, two bid actions this year. One, it was around IHO launch, which I'm going to talk about in more detail a little bit later, but we were incredibly, fortunate that there was no policy bill that came forward this session to change how we administer IHO launch. Some of the concerns in the legislature have been around, we allow 4-year degrees and we or there's certain trades programs that the young think that should be in there. And we use a very data-driven approach to determine what's in a demand job and what programs support the preparation of individuals for those in-demand jobs. So, yeah, I like to explain to legislators who are proposing those types of changes that, we can either follow the data or we're going to have somebody picking winners and losers. And, and that was something that when launch was first proposed, the legislature was very concerned that the Workforce Development Council would be picking winners and losers, and we are decidedly not doing that. The data drives the programs that are available, and for Idaho to, say, well, we don't want any bachelor degree programs because we're not at the universities. That's not going to meet the workforce needs of the state of Idaho. We need more of everything. We need more folks with commercial truck driving licenses and certified nurse assistants. We need more engineers. We need more project managers. We need more, healthcare. We need a lot more healthcare. Healthcare is a crisis, and so we were just really pleased that there wasn't an attempt to introduce a policy bill that would somehow limit launch. The negative part of that is they took additional funding out of launch on a one-time basis, but I'll talk about that more later. The second piece that was really important to us was the Workforce Development Council and the STEM Action Center went through a process over the last 2 years of looking at the strengths of the two organizations, looking at how are we meeting the needs of Idahoans for the education, connecting education to careers, which is really be the intent of both organizations. And we said, and we came to the table and said, we think the two agencies should merge. We think we should integrate the STEM Action Center into the Workforce Development Council. The STEM Action Center has done a phenomenal job over the last 10 years of really elevating the importance of science, technology, engineering, and math, and that we need to develop STEM skills because at this point, every job requires some level of STEM skills, right? There's no job where you're not interested with technology to some level. And so we said, for the next, 10 years, it makes sense that we actually bring the two entities together, and it allows the Workforce Development Council had primarily focused on kind of that high school, middle school exploration, high school transition to post-secondary. But it always said, gosh, we need to be doing more earlier, right? We need, we had partnered with the STEM Action Center on an externship program to get teachers out into industry to, learn about what the workforce needs were so they could go back to the classroom and not only talk about, what types of skills or expectations in the workplace that employers have, but also talk about the different jobs that are available. And so, by proposing this integration, we really are able to look at the whole continuum and working with our partners, with the Department of Education and the State Board of Education and others to make sure that, whatever we're doing, however we're helping to, develop the skills of our teachers, to prepare kids for careers, that we're intentionally integrating that career piece into it. I don't want a kindergartner having to decide if they want to be an engineer, right? But I want them to know that engineers exist. I want them to know that electricians or, HVAC or plumbers, I want them to know that all of these jobs are available to them and to be able to think about like, wow, I really like doing this activity. Here's how I could apply that in the future. And it becomes this culture of, culture of learning, of knowing how to connect education to careers so that, they're not sitting in a classroom going, why do I have to learn this equation and we're going to use it again? Well, yeah, you might. There are opportunities to, integrate more project-based learning and work-based learning into the classroom. And so this merger, I anticipated that this would be the first bill introduced during the session because, I mean, let's be real, we were dozing ourselves, right? It took a little while. We did push ourselves. So it took a little longer. I got a little worried towards the beginning of March. They're like, okay, come on, you got to get this thing introduced. But it passed almost unanimously through both House Senate Bed and then through that comma voice. So we had the integration, the budget bills followed. That was a huge win for the Workforce Development Council.
I know we're going to talk about budget separately, so I'll leave that. But a couple things that we've had quite a bit of interest in. One is the truck differential speed. So if you all know that when you're on the interstate or on a couple of the major highways of the state, you'll see that trucks drive 10 miles less. And it's just been a really interesting topic to watch, actually, for a lot of years. The legislature has wanted to make a change to this, but there's been quite a bit of resistance and opposition, and so it hasn't happened. But this was the year that it did happen, and so we're working on that. Starting July 1, I believe the speeds will continue to be 80 miles an hour, but we do need to do a little bit of study and make sure that we have all of our ducks in a row. I think a lot of the interest for it is we have a number of legislators who spend time in Utah, and in Utah, this is the way it's been for quite some time, and I just think the primary interest there is hopefully that it will make traffic flow more smoothly. And I'll tell you, a number of states do have save speed for passenger cars and trucks. However, a lot of them do not have a speed limit as high as 80 miles an hour. So this is something that we're looking at. Again, the hope is that it's about helping traffic to flow more smoothly. I know a number of people have had some concerns about the ability of the large trucks to be able to stop when they need to at that type of speed. But, you know, we'll also tell you they're already driving that speed. And I'm sure, yeah, that's used to you, right? So another line that comes to mind that might be of interest is the stickers on your license plates. So beginning July 1, you will no longer need to display stickers. And this is seen largely as an efficiency. You know, it's no longer about paper and stickers. It's more about electronic beams these days. And also, plates will no longer have to be replaced every 10 years. It'll just be replaced when, you know, the owner is responsible for making sure that it's legible. And so that might be something that is a little bit easing to some of our businesses. We'll see how that one goes. We've heard some questions from law enforcement, and so we'll see how that one goes. Those are a couple that come to mind.
Thank you. Great. Lisa.
Well, AARP, we any nine packs, the 50 plus, we're looking into, so that's so the session was crazy, fighting. But I'll go quickly through. I reiterate what the panel said already. We not only, you know, the 50 plus includes seniors, of course. I'm over 50, but we had a lot of multi-generational families. So what affects education also affects our population. So we had some consumer protection fraud bills that went through this year. Virtual currency kiosk fraud bill we will talk about later. There was veterans consumer protection legislation that we were happy to see go through. We do a lot of work in housing, and it's no surprise that individuals like to age in putty, so they want to stay in their homes as long as possible. If any of you have grandparents, you know this to be true. And nobody really wants to go into some type of institution. So any legislation that helps our population, helps anyone age in place, is good. So we had NDU legislation go through this year, not only allowing ADUs where they haven't been allowed before, but also financing options for that. There were bills about building smaller homes in neighborhoods. All of this allows for caregivers to live next to their family members. And instead of having to move out of the communities where they loved or where they've raised their families, they can put an ADU on, they can afford because they're expensive, and move into the smaller ADU and maybe move it in a family to keep an eye on there so that they can stay there in communities that they want. So we'll probably talk later about the budget, but I do want to mention Medicaid. There was a lot going on with Medicaid this year that impacts our population. Anything that makes the process of applying for a type of benefit more complex is negative for our population. So we try to get into those discussions and talk about, giving a little extra time for individuals over a certain age, making sure that all the instructions are clear and easily readable and easily followed, because some of our websites can become quite complicated, as many of you know, having gone to some. So we look at that. So as we move forward, looking at how they're going to implement work requirements for Medicaid, it will be of interest. Looking at that Idaho federal overlap, looking at the budget, which we'll probably talk about later, how that's going to affect provider rates, which will have an impact on access, especially in our rural areas of the state, and looking at how expanding those options for that missing middle housing in Idaho, what kind of impact that has on housing just in general will be interesting as well. Workforce shortages is also a big thing that we keep an eye on. So keep it going.
Great. As I look at this panel today, I've spent 20 years or so monitoring legislation for the Boise Metro Chamber. The Chamber's priorities have always been healthcare, education, workforce development, and infrastructure. So I love the combination of this panel and the perspectives of these panelists and why what they are talking about, although they're on the government relations side primarily, affects business. We need, as a business community, a strong healthcare system, a robust education, as to great workforce development programs and infrastructure for a growing state, especially in the Treasure Valley. And so I think this is great, and it's great to have the ARP here too. So that's wonderful. Let's go to some individual questions. So Molly, for years, many of the headlines in the legislature was the underfunding of ITV and the fact that there were more liabilities with maintenance and new construction that had to replace old construction. Well, we kind of seem to be past that and in a more stable budget place. Tell us what that has meant for your agency and now how you're viewing differently with the legislature as far as things to fund things on an ongoing basis. I mean, and I commend ID and the others who supported all those transportation changes, because it's just not in the crisis it seemed like it was for several years.
I'll summarize it as well, but I like what you said. It's been a long, interesting road, no pun intended on this one. For many, many years, the message to our legislators, with a lot of support from the business community, by the way, was we have got to have solid infrastructure in this state. This is absolutely fundamental to the state's overall vitality. And so in 2015, pretty significant revenue enhancement was achieved during that year, and it was huge fees. And it helps, but what it did is essentially help us to get to the point where we can just get better at maintaining what we have, quite honestly. And so just continuing to work out this issue with legislators, a big change that you talked about, Tom, happened in 2021. So a significant challenge for the legislature has been user fees versus is it appropriate from a policy perspective to use general funds or sales tax revenues to fund transportation. And for a long time, the attitude was it's user fees. That's where we are. But with our economy, which we're so fortunate for in this state, and the general fund being as healthy as it was, everything kind of broke loose in 2021. And so significant increases were made for congestion mitigation. For those of you who may not know, I'll just mention briefly, it's called Transportation Expansion and Congestion Mitigation. It's a program the legislature started with this little sliver, and then it was such a debate over this. So I think it was like $15 million a year, but is put in the door to that type of a policy change. And then from there, as the revenues, as I mentioned, came in, then the decision was we want to do more of this. So in 2021, they added more money to that so that we really were able to start doing some of the big infrastructure projects that everybody notices. And then also the decision was made to do general fund transfers into a program that we call strategic initiatives. And Governor Little was very much at the forefront of this. The legislature was supportive as well. And so it started out as roughly $300 million each year that was transferred from the general fund. And then that was split between the state and local systems, the state receiving 60%, local jurisdictions 40%. And that went for several years. We were able to combine that with that congestion mitigation funding that I just mentioned. And between those two, we were on our way to doing some very significant infrastructure projects throughout the state, many of which you enjoy on I-84. It's very much instrumental in Highway 16, which we're working on right now. Pretty soon, Brushy Valley is going to have another north-south corridor, which we desperately need. And so all those things are happening. It was intended to be ongoing, but it required a general fund transfer and approval through the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee each year. So we always knew this was a little bit of a volatile place to be, or vulnerable, maybe it's a better word. And then I think we all know what happened last summer. We started to see the revenues were coming in low as a result of the previous session. And so then everything changed. And so the prior year in 2025, some of the stress was showing it. The legislature reduced the $300 million to $275, but still a very good, strong amount of funding for us to continue on our plans. And let me just say briefly, when you're a transportation agency, you need to know what your funding is. It needs to be consistent. We had a 7-year plan. It takes time to work through these projects. So having that reliability, we planned for the money to be ongoing, and we structured our program assuming the funding would continue. So with that minor reduction, then we entered the next year. We requested in our budget $275 million because that's what the legislature had previously approved. But all the changes happened that you saw. And so, and for governor's budget request, he felt he had no choice but to recommend zero. You saw all the different things that were happening. The funding just was not there. And at the end of this session, they did end up putting $32 million into that fund. That again is split 60-40. So it was good to see that effort made, particularly as challenging as it was with the budget. And so that's where we are today. There's a lot of questions that remain. We're doing everything that we can to try not to lose the momentum. We know that communities very much want these projects to come. And so we've got so much money invested in engineering, in environmental, right-of-way, all of these strategic projects, right? And we don't want to lose that momentum. So we are doing everything we can for now to continue that. And we're just really interested to see what happens next year with the legislature. Every legislator who I talked to indicated that the change that was made this last year was not their intention. It's just so interesting to see whether you are a Democrat, whether you are Republican, of any type of philosophy, the same message came across to us when we chatted with these legislators. And I think it's because they're all hearing it from their constituents. And they know that their constituents want to have a good, safe, strong transportation system. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens next year or the years ahead to see how the legislature intends to continue to invest in transportation.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. I think that's been as you look at this historically, IG and its supporters' efforts to, and don't take this the wrong way, for everybody else, to bring Idaho out of the dark ages and it'd be 51st or 50th or 49th and all these different areas. That's a great story. I think other parts of state government wonder, why can't we utilize the same things? We're institutions like healthcare, education that are serving a growing state, and we haven't been able to kind of transition into that same progressive, maybe progressive is not the right word, but that better place that transportation got itself to. And I think that's just a great story, but I think it's something we need to replicate in other aspects of our state government in order to serve the business community as a whole. Thank you for those comments. Wendy, for the first several years of launch, the going home bill was always, how long is launch going to be held hostage for the governor to have to give up on all sorts of other things? And this year was really great not to see that and to see more of an acceptance, although you did have funding cuts and did lots of people had funding cuts. But explain to me how that evolution has happened and how that's going to affect the launch going forward. The business community has called the launch a game changer, has been supporting the launch from day one. The Voice Metro Chamber was the first organization to come out and actively endorse the governor's efforts. A wonderful thing that differentiates us from other states. Tell us the long-term path forward, how that goes.
Sure. Launch is a game changer. Launch, the State Board of Education has been doing the research on launch since it was enacted to look at, is it responsible, right? Not, we think it might be responsible, but is it responsible for some of the changes that we're seeing in post-secondary going on behavior in Idaho students? And it is decidedly changing that behavior. We had an 11% increase in the enrollment and in post-secondary going for the class of 2024. So it takes time to be able to measure the effectiveness of these types of programs. And that first year, actually the class of 2024 was the first year that received launch awards. We saw early indicators of improvement, but this last winter, we were able to match it up to national level data and, look at that causal effect of what is launch doing. But we're seeing more of Idaho kids are going on to post-secondary education. More Idaho kids are staying in state, making choices. We actually have some of the institutions have had phone calls from Utah universities wondering why their enrollment was decreasing, why the Idaho kids aren't coming, and it's because of launch. But it's also opening up the door for many other types of post-secondary. So rather than just looking at, traditional 2-year, 4-year colleges, we're able to look at what students are doing, going on to private providers and short-term treatment and all of that. So yes, launch had been the hostage bill for 3 years. First year in getting it passed, second two in getting the funding. This year, we came in our budget proposal. We were able to look at money that we had been given to start the program up, operating costs, personnel costs, and the class of 2024, we had out of the 6,500 students who received grants and were theoretically starting fall semester after their graduation, about 500 of them didn't show up. And so statute has us recapture those funds. So between that money and what we had in operational savings, we were able to offer, so we can give you $10 million back out of the fiscal year 26 funding, because it hasn't been used either in our operating core in and with the students going on. So obviously, I think that was well received. And the Workforce Development Council, and one of the things we pride ourselves on is transparency, right? If we're able to give money back, we're going to give money back. But if we're able to use the money, then we want to preserve it. So Joint Finance Appropriations Committee, as they had one day when they were doing these cash transfer motions, and as soon as they took that $10 million out, it approved that money coming back from fiscal year 26, they made another motion to take $10 million out of 27 and to transfer it. So that has gone through, been signed into law. We lost 10 million for 27, but the good news is that it was a one-time move. It will impact the program. If you look at the student version of the program, it's 1,250 grants that we theoretically can't make. I do believe we will be able to offer all of the graduating class of 2026 a launch award, and still kind of warning what their behavior looks like, and how many offers do we make, to how many actually fully accept their award, how many show up on campus, how many have issues where they end up not using their awards. But we feel pretty confident that we'll be able to not have to have an impact on the class of 2026. Where there will be an impact is if the high school students don't use all of the launch funding, then we're able to transfer up to $10 million to the adult launch program. And the adult launch program has kind of remained a little bit hidden because of all of the excitement about giving post-secondary funding to high school seniors. But the adult program's been in place since November of 2020, and we've had over 10,000 Idaho adults receive. Right now they can receive up to $3,500 for short-term training. Similar rules where it's an 80-20 split. We pay up to 80%, they have to fund the 20%. But the return on investment with the adult program is phenomenal. A year following training, we see an average of 40% increase in their income. It is like a year. It's taking people who are, they may be working, they may not be working, but their income is very low. They are one, car repair or emergency room visit from being on public services, or they may be on public services, but it is changing their lives. And so that's where we're going to really see the impact of the $10 million HAPI, is our ability to shift money into the adult program for 2027. We do have a state-funded workforce development training fund that the council is making some decisions to prioritize adult launch funding with that, but it's not a $10 million fund. So I'm grateful that it was a one-time cut. I think we're, it's a new program. We don't, it takes time to build up the outreach around the program. But this year we have about 22,000 high school seniors, and we have applications either fully submitted or in process from over 13,000 of them. So it's, deadline is next Wednesday or Thursday, the 15th. And we'll see, we've got about 3,000 of those applications that haven't been fully submitted. So we're in that crunch right now where we're trying to communicate with those kids and get them to make that submission, and then we'll start making awards the week after. So really excited about the opportunity is there, but a little frustrated about losing some of the funding. But
Thanks for that summary. I've watched the bill on Ray for 20 years and watched it consistently go down. And for it to go up for the first time since it's really mid-tracked is something else. So Brandon, you mentioned your $5 million victory. What other budgetary decisions are affecting the Department of Education right now, and how are you guys seeing?
Yeah, they still, but the conversation around budget should be what's at the forefront of everyone's mind. Of the dozens of bills that pass in education, we can stomach a lot of them. We can sell pretty solid bill, but our schools are funded properly, and then our teachers figured out. By and large, public education didn't receive a cut this year as in other agencies. We can celebrate that with the acknowledgement that operation costs are not going down for our schools. And so with no new money, they will feel that as a cut. That's fair. But I want to paint up in a different world what the other universe looks like. There's a universe where our governor doesn't say public education is to be felt harmless and lets the legislature go at it. Public education would have been cut. There's an argument that public education could have been cut because all these other agencies have been cut. It's only fair. So we got lucky in that space. But it's not just that the governor said we're going to be harmless, and the legislature doesn't always do what the governor says. So the superintendent received a letter, we love it, refer to it as our love letter from the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee, where they asked her to identify places that she could cut up to 5%. There is a world where the superintendent provides that list to the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. You better believe they would have taken that list and it would have made those cuts. It was a lively debate amongst her leadership team as to how she would respond to that. Because she's an elected official, she has the autonomy that other agencies don't necessarily have, and working through the governor's office. And she ultimately decided she was going to tell them thanks, but no thanks. That was a key point for legislation. That was a key point for funding. That was key to set precedent for what funding would look like in the next few years. As we made it appreciate being told no, and we definitely went our rounds, but we appreciate the fact that there were no cuts. Nothing came. So we snuck out. I hope it's a Learning Alliance doing a 55% cut. You notice that. There's a lot of things done that will be felt, but in the grand scheme of it's looking at, we could have done a lot worse. So we're grateful for that.
So Corey, there's no hold harmless assurances from the governor when it comes to next year. Kate Cummins, tell us about how Medicaid and how the legislature treated Medicaid this session is going to affect Idaho's healthcare community, especially Augusta.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I think it's helpful to provide a little bit of context about the budget situation that the legislature locked into this year. Over the past 5 years, we've had a flush balance sheet. We've had surpluses, we had influx of federal cash, the COVID relief money, and that sort of thing. And that created an environment where policymakers could pass tax cuts. It's a very politically popular thing to do, and you don't necessarily want to be sitting on extra revenues that you don't have a use for. But we're like the dog that caught up to the car finally, and now what, when we've now cut to the point where we end up in a revenue shortfall going into this year's legislative session. So over the past 5 years with the tax cuts, we have cut $4 billion out of the state budget. And over the next 4 years with the income tax cuts that have been cut, we'll lose $4.5 billion going forward. Coming into this year's legislative session, the governor had already taken action because the revenues were short. And so he had given instruction back in August, September timeframe for agencies to do holdbacks. And what that meant for Medicaid was a 4% provider rate cut. When that happened, many of us, it's just, well, you're getting 4% less for the Medicaid services you're providing. For the state's behavioral health managed care contract, that meant that that contractor decided to eliminate entire services from being covered. Those included things like assertive community treatment teams that respond to people that are in crisis, adult peer support, partial hospitalization programs, and reimbursement for transportation for folks that need to get to their appointments. Those cuts in behavioral health cause real consequences. By the time the legislature came in January, there were word of deaths that had occurred because the assertive community treatment teams were no longer funded to go help people in crisis. I think by the end of the session, we had heard of 4 deaths that could be concretely attributed to that. So the legislature was facing, a revenue shortfall situation. And, we also, on top of the state passed tax cuts, and HR 1 that was passed last summer at the federal level has a lot of tax pieces to that the legislature had to decide about how and when they conform to those tax provisions. Idaho is a largely a conformity state, but there were some decisions to be made about, do we conform as of January 2025 retroactively and let people file their 2025 taxes with those tax changes? Do we make it effective in 2026 going forward? That would make a difference to the bottom line. And so, conformity to HR 1, the estimate that JFAC ended up going with was $155 million impact to the state's bottom line in FY26 and $175 million in FY27. So you're facing even more budget shortfall. Instead of addressing the revenue side of the picture, the legislature is an election year, so the idea of increasing taxes or holding off on conformity, that sort of thing, not a popular thing to do in an election year. They also are constitutionally required to have a balanced budget. So they have some constraints there. So we're not gonna look at the revenue side, so if we're looking at the spending side, then the narrative became, and Medicaid got us in this position. Medicaid drove us into this budget hole. And whereas education and transportation are really viewed as investments for the state, Medicaid is viewed as a black hole to many of our legislators. The Medicaid expansion program that was passed by ballot initiative by voters in 2018 by a 62% margin, the legislature has been trying to find a way to repeal that or scale it back ever since. It implemented in 2020, and public polling in 2023 showed that the public support was even greater than when they passed it in 2018. So 73% of Iowa voters, oversampled for Republicans, by the way. Very strong public support for this program, and yet a legislature that really wanted to see it go away. So the first bill we saw come out of chute looking to really scale back Medicaid was Medicaid expansion repeal bill. Like, we expected that would be coming. We've seen one every year, pretty much. And again, this year it served as the shot over the bow. Whenever a repeal bill comes forward, the public outcry is significant. So I think the day after that bill introduction, every one of those committee members had at least 200 messages in their inbox. So they pivoted from Medicaid expansion to repeal to how do we try to rein in the numbers of people that are using Medicaid. And so HR 1 at the federal level last year, it largely made those tax cuts on the back of Medicaid. So there are a lot of Medicaid eligibility changes, the work reporting requirements, that sort of thing, that largely don't pick it until after the midterm elections for obvious reasons. But Idaho, our legislature decided to take some of those policy changes, the work requirements specifically, and accelerate the timeline for that. So at the federal level, HR 1 says starting January 1 of 2027, these Medicaid enrollees have to start reporting work hours, volunteer hours, or qualify for an exemption. And the concern with work requirements isn't that most of this population isn't working. The Medicaid expansion population is largely working, they're service workers. A third of the Medicaid expansion population has serious mental illness that gets in the way of being able to work to the maximum that they could, perhaps. So the work reporting requirements create a bureaucratic process that a lot of people have difficulty navigating. So you end up with people losing their coverage, not because they don't technically qualify to keep it, but because they can't navigate the system to prove that they qualify. And so what we ended up with, I would call it a win considering what could have happened. But what we ended up with was House Bill 913, which just accelerates work requirements for IAPO. So instead of starting January, all of our Medicaid expansion enrollees have to prove 3 months, not 1 month, that the federal language says, but 3 months of work by December 31st. So, these requirements were coming anyway. They're just accelerated a bit for Idaho and a bit stiffer requirement for Idaho.
Thank you. Lisa, tell us about the cryptocurrency kiosk fraud bill and how it will help Idahoans since it was passed and signed out of here.
When we poll our membership, Fry is always top of mind for all of our members. And many of you may think, you hear a lot about fraud and you think, oh, you're older, they fall for it more often. Actually, the numbers show that individuals under the age of 40 fall for scams and fraud more often than individuals over 65, but individuals in the older age range have more assets, so they lose a significant portion more than those under the age of 40. So we have every year taken on some aspect of fraud. Last session we passed a report and hold bill that allowed banks to kind of intervene softly in transactions that look to be fraudulent. That went through our legislature unanimously in both chambers, which is great. So this year, it was in, I want to say, end of June last year, so after the session, we had a woman come into our office, 78 years old, asking for help. She thought she had been a victim of a scam. She had put $180,000 into a cryptocurrency kiosk and wanted us to help her get it back. And there's nothing that we could do. There's nothing that law enforcement could do. And many of you may not know this, but our cryptocurrency kiosks in the state have been unregulated. So that they don't have to do things that you would do at a typical ATM or bank where you get a receipt. And they don't have to follow most of the laws. So we decided to take this on this session. Maybe not the smartest thing in an election cycle since we were creating a new regulatory framework, but we got it through. What the bill does is it requires kiosk owners to register with the Idaho Department of Finance as money transmitters. It requires them to post warnings, fraud warnings. It requires a receipt. The receipts have to show where the money lands and what crypto wallet and where it's originated from, which will help law enforcement. Run. Give me a minute. I think the area is really dry. And it requires them to maintain records and in-house in case the Department of Finance or the Idaho Commission on Aging, it's an adult protection issue, and law enforcement to work together to maybe get some of that funding back. It puts a cap on new users because most victims of cryptocurrency kiosk fraud are new users. So there's a cap of $2,000 a day and transactions $10,000 in a month, just for new users. Don't ask me how they can follow all that with the blockchain. I have no. And it also delays new users' transactions for 3 days, So that gives them a little opportunity to breathe and rethink about what has happened, because most of the time they're in this pen, right? And our schema is really good out there. They have to have a large toll-free operator and just some other just basic things that hopefully will put some brakes on our items losing money to crypto kiosk fraud. So in our state in 2024, and the 2025 numbers are just starting to come out, but in our state, Idaho has lost $63 million to fraud. It's always underreported by at least 60% and change. So you've got to add a little more onto that. But of that $63 million, $35 million of that was crypto kiosk fraud loss. That's a chunk. So we're hoping over the next couple of years, as this is put in play, that number will go down and help individuals in our state. It'll help our 50+ population, but it will help everyone. And we were very lucky that I was able to do some lobbyist voodoo magic on CoinFlip, who's the largest kiosk owner in the world. And they came on board. They were in favor of our bill, testify in favor of our bill. So, and even with all of that, it just squeaked right by. Where I think if it wasn't an election year, we probably would have had the easier time getting through.
Great, thank you. Let's talk about artificial intelligence and how it's affecting your industries and your various aspects of the economy you all have such an influence over. Let's start with Wayne. How is your agency working with companies like Micron, St. Luke's, who state government to bolster workforce? I'm sorry, that was the next question. Let's just talk about AI. Let's start with Lisa and come this way. Yeah.
Okay, so AI, that's a tough thing for people. Our membership, most of our members are over the age of 60, and it's still a little foreign to them. So we've been talking, we do a lot of education at ARK. We've been talking a lot in the aspect of fraud and how AI is used in fraud, but also talking about how we help it be in place, which is really important to our population. So from helping them monitor their medications, managing their health, utilizing communication tools that AI offers to make so they'll feel so isolated. And that's a big issue in our rural communities. You have the elderly that, they're isolated, they're lonely, and oddly, AI helps with that. And so we've been talking to them about, privacy concerns and advanced security, and realizing that AI doesn't always get it right. And so as we move forward with AI, concerns for our membership are going to be making sure that there are efforts towards letting the public know when AI is being utilized. So especially it's being utilized to make decisions, and that they have the opportunity to have those decisions looked over by a human after they're made. So that's really important to our membership. That education is the biggest thing. I think a lot of our members don't understand AI, and I have to say, I used it for the first time. Don't judge me. I used it the first time just a couple of days ago, and it has put together a one-page for me, and it was pretty amazing. There were some mistakes on it, but it looked good, and I probably could have done on my own. So I, at my age, am still trying to figure out AI. So I think it's something that everyone's concerned with, and how it's going to be integrated into all decisions moving forward.
Great.
I'll start on the positive. Our DMB is using AI, and our DMB is very innovative. They love to just always be moving forward and looking for ways to be more efficient. I hope you've all noticed that it's easier to get your driver's licensing, vehicle credentials over the years. They're always coming up with the next way to make life more efficient. So they are using AI for filling out some of the forms, some of the better automation of some of the work that we need to do. However, kind of like you're alluding to with the watching it, you have to verify AI, and so we've been pretty adamant about that. Yes, we'll use it to be more efficient, but somebody has to look and follow through a check and make sure that everything is being done properly, and that's kind of where we are right now on that. On the negative side, obviously cyber criminals are using AI as well. And I'm curious, how many of you got the text message supposedly from us saying that we were going to cancel your registration? I'm expecting everybody to raise their hand. I mean, everywhere I go, everybody's been getting those messages, and they're just getting, the AI is allowing them to get more and more convincing. They're just really getting more difficult to mitigate. So it was a huge concern.
Yeah, thanks, Molly. Whitney.
Yeah, we're looking at AI on a couple of fronts. I think overall the council, we don't believe that AI is going to, just wholeheartedly replace jobs. We think that AI is going to replace people who don't know how to use AI. So, when we look at it, we're looking at it from the standpoint of how do we make sure that not only our youth, but our workforce have access to develop AI skills, and then how do we help with the HR, the hiring processes. So, at the youngest level, and I think Brennan will probably talk about one of the bills that passed this session, that we were involved in the working group that helped to create that bill, but to have the State Department set standards for education. And to that end, out at the STEM Action Center, we funded $250,000 to the department to help create curriculum, to create AI ambassadors in each region of the state, to make sure that professional development that we're really looking at, how do we make sure that it's properly, ethically, integrated into education as you move up into, the workforce. That's one of the things we're struggling with right now is what is our role? What do we do, should we be out there trying to, develop curriculum, training for businesses, for, the just employees of Idaho businesses to learn how to integrate AI into, their workplace habits, or, how do we help facilitate the introduction of AI into hiring practices? So we had our quarterly council meeting at Micron a couple of weeks ago, and their global talent acquisition director talked to us about how Micron's using AI hiring process. And they have this incredibly big vision, and they're, probably a third of the way in implementing that vision. But, it involves, AI screening of, applicants, AI interviewing of the applicants, and looking at both those, the pros and the cons of that. A pro is that, the interviews can be conducted at any time that's convenient to the candidate, right? If you want to do it at 2:00 in the morning, the ad agent can interview you at 2:00 in the morning. But then, well, what about bias? What about, how do you navigate, to getting to the right candidate? And at the end of the day, there has to be a human involved in the process, but there are a lot of things that businesses could use AI for to better the application and screening process for new employees. On the flip side of that, though, is you have
You have folks who are a little more challenged to find jobs and, haven't developed the workplace readiness skills. And so how do we prepare them to interact with that type of hiring system? How do we make sure that they aren't just, completely dismissed because they don't have those skills? Think about somebody coming out of the corrections system that's been in, maybe for 10 years. They haven't used AI at all. So how do you prepare them to interact with an agent? I'm just, as I wrap up here, I'm just going to say one of the funniest things that that the Micron folks told us was that their AI agent that was doing the interview, one of the things that they've been testing is, can it detect an AI candidate? Right? Because just like now the agent doing somebody, so how do they detect somebody that isn't real? So anyhow, lots of opportunities, lots of work to be done. Obviously the private sector is driving how they want to use AI. I just want us thinking about how do we make sure that people aren't left behind because they don't have those AI skills.
Thank you, Rin.
I'm just realizing that I should probably check on that Africa crane, so I sell my crypto money too. I've been waiting for that for a turn. I'm not trying to make a point out of general curiosity by raising hands. How many of you use AI in your professional or personal life at least once a week? Okay, so we do this often. We go to schools, superintendent IBS to students. If there's only one thing you take away from my comments today, I hope it's about AI. This is something that we talk about getting IO out of the dark. You just buckle up. We got something exciting now. So Senator Cook passes this legislation with a phenomenal working group of industry education. It'll come scared. The bill does not legislate, mandate, or force AI in classrooms. What it does is it sets a framework. It says this is what it could look like, it should look like if you're going to use and teach artificial intelligence in the K-12 system. Now, what we did is upon that bill signing the department, my histories of public-private partnerships, and in a year where we broke, and it's like, let's get some people together to figure out what to use. We have this multi-million-dollar partnership that's come in, where STEM Action, INL, and Micron come together and they say, we will put together some PD to train these teachers. We will get preparatory resources, because most of our educators did not go through school in the day and age where they could use Canva to create their lesson plans. They could use ChatGPT to finesse their lectures. The videos that could be produced makes a teacher's life a lot easier. We did that. Then we went to a high school curriculum provider based out of Iowa Stukamp that said, we will fund at no cost to the school's full curriculum. And in that curriculum, it covers what is AI? What are the ethics of AI? And so instead of a student actually getting into using the Dalabani, they're actually learning about access, where the history and all these fun things. And then what I'm most excited about is Microsoft agreed to donate paid versions of Copilot to every student and teacher. Parents are gonna freak out about that. Well, why are we doing that? That is so much safer than what their students and teachers are doing now, because when you have a closed garden, a paid account, it protects that information. The number one concern we're hearing about after this partnership, parents are coming to a superintendent saying, we don't like this. We don't want this. Please don't do this. We don't want our kid being taught by robots. We don't want their voice recorded. So I'm asking a favor of all of you to be our ambassadors. My worry is the day will come where our students will sit across from employers in an interview and they will say, well, we didn't do anything with AI because in the Idaho public education system, we were too worried about it. And the politically safe thing to do is we decided, let's not do that at all. And then a kid from Utah is gonna say, well, I actually had a little experience with it. This public-private partnership that we have in Idaho is the most formative AI education partnership in the nation. No other nation has Microsoft's, or no other state in the nation has Microsoft's. But I'm saying, we'll make sure every student has these accounts, they have training wheels on them. So for those of us that haven't spent a ton of time with AI, allows the student to kind of get used to it. What does it do? How does it work? I'm not putting my personal information in. Long story short, Iowa is about to lead on AI, but our biggest detractor, our biggest enemy is going to be ourselves. It's going to be people not understanding it and wanting to bury their head in sand and do nothing with it. We don't want our students in Iowa being caught by robots. We care deeply about students and teachers' private information. But to think that we can be successful in the world to come without a general knowledge of what AI does and how it works, It's bullish. It will be properly preparing our kids. So I would ask you, please get the word out. This is a big deal, and we're going.
I have heard from no employers that they don't want employees that know how to use AI. I mean, that is, you're spot on, right? We cannot have our kids coming out of secondary school and not knowing how to interact with AI.
Let's hope that us getting in the way of ourselves on AI doesn't fall hat in with many of the things that we sometimes do as a state. Corey, AI in healthcare.
Yeah, so AI is doing a lot in healthcare, but it's not providing your care, that sort of thing. So, you know, some of the cool things that it's being used for in healthcare are generative tools that help clinicians with their documentation. It's a really good thing that I went into government relations 20-some years ago, because prior to that, my role was overseeing the medical transcription department, a role that largely does not exist anymore. When you go to the doctor nowadays, you're likely to have the doctor say, do you mind if the AI scribe documents our conversation today? And instead of the doctor having to wait until the end of their workday and then dictate all of their charts, and then somebody somewhere else type out everything that they said, and then the clinician having to do edits and all of that, an AI tool is summarizing the conversations, and then the clinician is just confirming that it got it right. And so huge efficiency there. There are tools as well that help with diagnostics. So in areas like mammography, you've got a radiologist that's looking at the images and that sort of thing. An AI tool can sometimes flag, you know, there's a little constellation of densities right here that you might look at, and so it helps maybe catch things that the human eye might not catch. AI tools are not making diagnoses, they're not making clinical decisions. We would be very concerned if it goes in that direction. They're not replacing staff roles. There are revenue cycle tools that are helping with all of, you know, the amount of time and money that goes into our billing staff working with payers, and payers denying claims and going appealing claims and back and forth. Now it's our AI tools against their AI tools, really, you know, and really sort of speeding up the process of, if the payer didn't get all the documentation they need, well then let's make sure to give them the documentation they need, and it doesn't have to flow through humans to get that process completed so that the payment can be rendered for the services that were already delivered. As far as policy, we don't have specific recommendations right now, but we would prefer to see a federal framework of regulations rather than a 50-state patchwork. We're already seeing, I cover the state of Oregon as well. There was legislation in Oregon last year that an AI tool could not call itself a nurse, could not call itself a doctor. Now, we had WebMD for a long time, you know, and so the cat's out of the bag on that. But I think we would prefer it happen quickly at the national level, but also get it right. Because if we don't have federal action on this, then we are going to see a 50-state patcher.
Excellent. Thank you for all those great comments on AI. We're to the point in our program that we're going to spend our last few minutes with a Q&A. Cindy has the microphone. So anyone that would like to ask the panelists any questions, please do so.
I've got one.
I figured, I was waiting for you.
This one, I think, was answered, but I just want to make sure. So last week, there was a Boise Metro session with the governor addressing the business community. He talked about how education was kept whole, but then I hear about to launch budget cut, and I was wondering how those two things reconcile. I think, Brandon, you've explained it, and I guess I didn't realize that the launch budget was separate from education being made whole. So if the two of you guys could possibly clarify that, that'd be helpful for me and maybe for the rest of the EBIs.
Sure. So in the macro sense, education, of course, took a big hit. When you go to specific budgets, what the governor was referring to is when it comes to the specific public schools budget, that was going to be the whole IO Digital Learning Alliance is not part of that budget, so they took their 55% cut. So that it's a great question. We look at it, yeah, education got kind of beat up in a lot of spaces. The governor's reference was to that specific budget, but please.
Not the K-12 budget, but yes, IFA Digital Learning, Workforce Development Council, post-secondary, all of those budgets took hits. But the K-12, what I call K-12 budget, is what was held whole.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Nothing like a matter of semantics.
Yeah. That's correct.
We can take one more before closing remarks if anyone has another question. Okay.
Holly, you talked about how HD has to be set in your plan. What changes do you guys have to make, if any, going forward due to the cuts in transportation funding? Obviously, we had the 5 years of this, we'll call it slush fund, but a surplus. But going forward, what does that ongoing 7-year plan look like now that the federal funds are largely, all those funds are behind us? What does that 7-year plan look like going forward? Because of course, going back to the Chamber of LSP, talks a lot about growth, right? And it's hard to expand business without the infrastructure going with that. So looking to the next 7 years after the session, what changes do you see to kind of that separate plan, you think?
Let me touch, just since you mentioned the federal side, I think that's good. Let me just weave that in for a second. The congressional funding authorization that we're currently under is IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It was signed under the Biden administration, and it's going to expire in this coming September. So it is right around the corner. So with what's happening with the instability on the state funding, it just makes that all the more important. We believe it will be funded at there won't be cuts there. We don't think there will be. Don't think that's the desire of Congress or the president. So that's something to watch. If there could be a bump, that would be great. We're also really interested in how much of the funding is tied up in federal grant opportunities versus the general money that we use for our basic projects. Of course, we like to have that money more that grants because we can plan for it. Ada, to answer your question on the state level, we're just doing everything we possibly can to continue our momentum where we are, to continue the level of study. Everybody's concerned about growth. Everybody's concerned about congestion. So everywhere we go, and what legislators, as being a part of that, they want us to continue preparing for these projects. We can do that for a short while, but we do need to know if there's a different scenario ahead in terms of long-term transportation funding. We need to learn what that is, because we can't sustain that for very long. That would be too much going into planning and right-of-way and all these different things we do environmental. If we don't have the funding to do it, we'd be better off to maintain those pavements and keep the infrastructure in the condition that it's in. So we're just really making sure. The last thing we want to do is to have a message that says, oh, here's these cuts, and here's these projects that we're really trying as hard as we can to hold on to those. They may have to wait a little bit. How can we keep those on the menu and still get them forward. We're very optimistic that that will happen. It certainly does require this partnership with the legislature, and I think there's a lot of appetite for that, but we'll just have to see.
Thanks, Wally. Isn't it also really good that if you wait, maybe price will come down and the cost does too? Tourism.
Well,
Thank you to our panelists and thank you to our great audience. The questions you asked. I thoroughly enjoyed my opportunity to interact with this great group today. And thank you to the IBR for putting on these community-minded educational sessions that I think benefit New York. So thank you all.
Yes, a huge thank you to the panelists and to our moderator, Tom Littell. You know, and I really want to thank you not just for your time today, but your tireless advocacy work at the Capitol through this session. It really is very much appreciated. And I know you're all very trained in celebrating the wins, so it's nice to see the others wins out there. The Breakfast Series report will publish in the April 24th edition of the Idaho Business Review. That is the same day that today's recorded event will be available to watch on our website. Thank you again to our Breakfast Series presenting sponsor, Holly Troxel, and our supporting sponsors, Bank of America, St. Luke's Health Plan, and the Grove Hotel. Let's give them one more round of applause. Our next event coming up is on May 7th. We will be recognizing Idaho's incredible business leaders at the CEO of Influence Awards program, and we do invite you to join us for that. If you'd like more information about the 2026 Breakfast Series or other Idaho Business Review upcoming events, just visit our website at idahobusinessreview.com. With that, I wish you all a lovely day. Thank you for your time again this morning, and we'll see you at the next IBR event.